What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today it's time for part 2 of my final review for Modern Warfare 3. In the first part, we talked about what Modern Warfare 3 did right and the things I liked about the game. Today's video is going to be the opposite, where I talk about what Modern Warfare 3 did wrong in my opinion, and the things that I didn't like about this game. Now, a few things to cover before we get into this. Just like with the first episode, these are all just my opinions. Feel free to disagree. If you do, please let me know why you disagree down below. Also, something that I feel is important to mention here is I actually do like Modern Warfare 3. In fact, in my opinion, this is the best Call of Duty game we've had in quite a few years now. It is my favorite COD in the modern era of COD. And therefore, even though this video may end up being longer than the first video, that often is the case, that's typically just due to the fact that it takes longer to explain why I don't like something, compared to basically just listing out things that I do like, since that doesn't require nearly as much explanation. Also, just a quick note I wanted to throw in here, just because I'm doing these final review videos, that doesn't mean that I'm completely done with Modern Warfare 3 content. It's likely you'll still see a few Modern Warfare 3 videos sprinkled in between now and the release of Black Ops 6. I just really wanted to get this final review up, and with that out of the way, let's dive into this, and let's address the big elephant in the room. And this is by far the #1 piece of criticism that I see directed toward Modern Warfare 3, and that is, this game is just a DLC for Modern Warfare 2. It's a glorified DLC, it's a $70 DLC. And with this topic, there are absolutely elements of this that I agree with. Now, I did discuss this in part 1 of this final review series, and in that, I mentioned that gameplay-wise, I totally disagree with this statement. Modern Warfare 3 plays very drastically different from Modern Warfare 2. In fact, within the context of the Call of Duty franchise, I would say the gameplay design philosophies were polar opposites with Modern Warfare 2 compared to Modern Warfare 3. So from a gameplay perspective, which I care about most, I would say no, Modern Warfare 3 does not play like a DLC for Modern Warfare 2. However, I do agree with elements of this, and I do agree that this is an area that really significantly held this game back from reaching its true potential. So this game had the same awful user interface as Modern Warfare 2. This is something that we were complaining about throughout the entire life cycle of Modern Warfare 2, and they made basically no improvements to this, or very few improvements to this, from Modern Warfare 2 into Modern Warfare 3. We also had Carry Forward, which did have some positives, and I talked about that in the first video as well, but Carry Forward also came with downsides. When you have the same operator skins and weapons and attachments and many other assets as literally the previous game that you were just playing, there's definitely a lack of a new game feel with Modern Warfare 3. It didn't really have its own unique art style or art direction, and while the game played very different, it didn't distinguish itself visually from Modern Warfare 2. In fact, just as an example of that, if you show me a clip of a Modern Warfare 2 gun on a Modern Warfare 2 map in Modern Warfare 2 or Modern Warfare 3, since there was carry forward for both guns as well as certain maps, honestly, it would take me a couple seconds to tell you which game is which when you show me these images. If I look closely enough, I could figure it out, but you would have to look closely to figure that out. Now, in saying that, the moment you actually watch some gameplay, you see the person moving around, you see gunfights taking place, it becomes way more obvious which game is which, because they do play very different. But there was absolutely a lack of that new game feel when it came to the visuals and the heads-up display, for instance, in the game when you were actually in a match. On top of that, just circling back to this carry forward a little bit, while on the positive side, it was consumer friendly in the sense that the skins that you bought in Modern Warfare 2, they maintained their value over multiple Call of Duty games, which we've never seen before in Call of Duty. At the same time, I really didn't like that right at the launch of Modern Warfare 3, we had tons and tons of wacky out there skins from Modern Warfare 2. And it's the same skins that I was looking at over the past year with Modern Warfare 2 already. It didn't have that typical tone that a Call of Duty game will have at launch that is very unified and feels like a brand new game with a unified tone and vision. I of course expect that to degrade over time as they add more silly skins over time, because that's just what they do in Call of Duty. But at launch for a Call of Duty, I generally like seeing a really cohesive art style at least, and I just wasn't seeing that at launch for this game. And I think that's one of the downsides of Carry Forward, at least in my eyes. Now, on top of that, with them carrying everything forward, I found that the attachment selection, since they carried forward attachments as well, it got way overcomplicated, and it was just an absolute mess. You had so many attachments in the game that were very similar to each other. They filled essentially the same role, but they had very slightly different stat changes, and it just felt very unnecessarily complex when it came to this. And most of that unnecessary complexity came from the fact that they carried forward the Modern Warfare 2 attachments, while ensuring that Modern Warfare 3 had its own very unique set of attachments to play with as well. Now, at the very least, when it came to this complexity, having advanced stats was a nice step forward from Modern Warfare 2, so it did help us at least kind of parse through those attachments and find out which ones were actually best. But at the end of the day, that didn't really solve the issue, it just made it a little bit easier to deal with. Additionally, when it came to the Modern Warfare 2 guns carrying over into Modern Warfare 3, especially early on in this game's life cycle, with the way they balance things, most of the Modern Warfare 2 guns were just not viable choices compared to the Modern Warfare 3 guns. Like, I'm not surprised that they wanted to make sure that the Modern Warfare 3 guns would stand out a little bit compared to the Modern Warfare 2 ones, because they want you using the new and exciting things. But at the same time, I do feel the gap between those was just way too wide early on. These days, things have gotten better. They've definitely buffed up a lot of the Modern Warfare 2 guns and fixed much of the visual recoil and stuff that those had. And I would say most of the Modern Warfare 2 guns are at least viable now, but there's definitely still some pretty bad ones in there that never did get fixed to the point where I would even consider them to be viable choices in this game. Next up on the It's Just a DLC topic, at launch, there were 0 original maps in Modern Warfare 3. Instead, we got remasters of the 16 launch maps from the original Modern Warfare 2 from way back in the day. And while I personally thought it was pretty cool and nostalgic to be playing on those maps, at the end of the day, there were 0 original maps for this game. And that absolutely is a point against Modern Warfare 3 as well. Ideally, you'd want to see mainly brand new original maps so it feels like a brand new original game. And then finally, just another little point here on the topic of It's Just a DLC. One big thing that I found frustrating is the firing range. Throughout the entire life cycle of Modern Warfare 3, there was quite a bit of criticism directed at the firing range and how it was handled, and there was plenty of feedback provided on how something like that could improve. Yet, when Modern Warfare 3 launched, I was quite disappointed to find that the firing range was essentially the exact same thing, at least feature-wise. It was the same thing that we were used to in Modern Warfare 2, and it's just things like that that I found to be disappointing. So absolutely, in this negative section, I can sympathize with the It's Just a DLC argument, at least when we're talking about visual identity with the game, as well as the lack of original maps. Next up, while the post-launch support for the 6v6 game mode was incredible this time around, the same definitely can't be said for the other multiplayer modes like War, Ground War, and 2v2 Gunfight. When it came to the War game mode, I was excited that they brought that back. I really enjoyed that in COD World War II. It was a nice change of pace sort of game mode, and I thought it was really interesting, and I honestly quite like both War maps that they ended up bringing to the game. However, we only ever saw 2, one at launch and then one at the launch of Season 2. Beyond that point, there was 0 support for the War game mode. Similarly, for Ground War and Invasion, the battle maps, we didn't see any post-launch support for these whatsoever. We were just stuck with the maps that we had at launch. And I would say the fact that there was no post-launch support for this one hurt even more, because at the very least, it seems they could have brought forward some of the Modern Warfare 2 battle maps. They did carry forward a few of these 6v6 maps. Why couldn't they also do that with a couple of the battle maps, just to fill out the rotation a little bit for those that are into Ground War and Invasion? And then also with 2v2, there was very little support for that as well compared to previous years with that mode. And here's the deal. For me, I prefer 6v6. All I really want to play is 6v6. I'm not really interested in playing those other game modes. However, they are a part of the game, and I'm sure many people bought the game, at least somewhat because those other modes existed. And therefore, if you're going to put them in the game, there should at least be a bare minimum level of support, and I don't feel they even reach that. Additionally, since we are talking about other modes outside of 6v6, which is where most of my attention is, I do at least want to give a brief mention in this video about the campaign. I felt the campaign was not very good at all. While they were an interesting idea, I felt like they leaned way too heavily into those open combat missions, and I think the campaign would have been way better with just 1 or 2 of those. Also, just in general, the length of the campaign was way too short, and the story was not great. And I do feel this is another area that held this game back and held its reputation back as well. After that, let's just dive into a bunch of random things that I've got jotted down here. One of them is inconsistent seasonal content. If you look at the total amount of content that we got post-launch, it was very impressive this time around for Modern Warfare 3, and I've got no complaints about that. However, I didn't like how inconsistent they were from one season to the next. Like Season 3, we got 6 6v6 maps. That was amazing. So many maps in one season. But then for Season 5 and 6 combined, we got 3 6v6 maps that weren't variants. And personally, I would definitely prefer seeing a lot more consistency and spreading that out a little bit more. So each season has a certain minimum level of expectation when it comes to content, especially map content. Another thing I wasn't a fan of with this game, although this isn't really new with this Call of Duty game, it's been around for a little while, this is inconsistent connection quality. I know for many people they had constant packet bursts and stutters to the point where the game was almost unplayable. I saw some clips of people experiencing that, and it looked really bad. For me, I was lucky enough for that to not happen too often. I did get the odd bad match here or there, but for the most part, things ran fairly smooth for me. However, my big issue was inconsistent ping. One game, I'd have a 20 millisecond ping. The next, I'd be at 70 milliseconds. The one after that, I'd be at 90 milliseconds. And it would just be bouncing all over the place, and it was so inconsistent with how the connection experience felt. And for one of the biggest FPS franchises in the world, that really shouldn't be happening. On top of this, and something that may or may not be related, at least in my case it didn't appear to be related, but for some people maybe it is, this is the fact that Modern Warfare 3 introduced forced texture streaming. Now, this is more likely a franchise-wide decision rather than something that Sledgehammer decided to just introduce into Modern Warfare 3, but I'm personally not a big fan of it. I think there should always be an option to have all of the high-resolution textures downloaded on your system, so there's no requirement for extra bandwidth being eaten up in order to get those textures displaying on your screen. And don't get me wrong, I think having texture streaming as an option is excellent for those that don't have a whole lot of space to store high-resolution texture packs, but in my eyes, that should be an option, not something that's forced on you. After that, as we continue to go through these just random notes that I've got, spawns. Now, interestingly, I also put spawns in the What They Did Right video, and the reason behind that is I feel Sledgehammer has the best handle over the modern spawn system that was introduced with Modern Warfare 2019. And as a result, I feel they deserve some credit there. Like, it could be so much worse. I feel the spawns were way worse in Modern Warfare 2. However, in saying that, I still feel like they're just not great. And there's especially certain modes and map combinations where the spawns are pretty bad still. And therefore, I feel it is worth a mention here because that can absolutely impact how the game plays, depending on the map and mode that you're playing, of course. Then let's talk about Armory credits a little bit. This is a new system that they introduced with Modern Warfare 3, and with this, at launch, just in case you guys forgot, you couldn't unlock all of the playable content, so all of the guns and the equipment and the score streaks. You couldn't unlock those without earning Armory credits. You could reach that maximum level for your military ranks, and you still wouldn't have everything unlocked. So in order to unlock those, you had to complete daily challenges, and then you had to also get wins. For every win that you got, you would get an Armory credit. And for me, I'm not a big fan of locking launch playable content behind Armory credits. I think all of the playable content, all of the class items, all of the score streaks, that should all be available within your military ranks. And then after that, I'm totally on board with Armory credits for like post-launch content that you missed from previous seasons, or for various cosmetic items, for instance. I think that's totally fine. It was mainly the fact that various playable items were locked behind that, and it did take quite a long time to unlock every playable item in the game. And looking back at it toward the end of the life cycle, you might have forgot how much of a grind it actually was at launch to unlock every single playable class item in the game through this Armory credit system. For many people, this took several weeks, when normally this would take either like a few days or maybe a week for some people. So while I think it was an interesting thing they tried out, and I think there's some potential there for the future, I didn't really like how they handled the Armory credit system overall. Next up with Modern Warfare 3, there were lots of little bugs and a lot of new ones that were introduced with this game as well. And that does happen every year with Call of Duty. I feel like every Call of Duty struggles with its own issues and its own bugs, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be pointing them out here. So things like the latency widget just being NA for, I believe, an entire season, that was kind of frustrating, especially for console players where we can't just open our scoreboard and see what our ping is. If we wanted to check our ping, we had to go into the start menu and then scroll through a few options in order to see what our ping was in that game, and that was just frustrating to deal with for as long as we had to deal with that. Also, for many people, there were various guns or attachments that just wouldn't unlock for them, and it was bugged out. There was nothing they could do to unlock it. On top of that, there's various attachments that weren't actually applying in game. I'm looking at the Jack Jawbreaker kit, for instance, on the KV Broadside. For, I believe it was months, you could put a muzzle attachment on that gun. It would take up one of your attachment slots. If you went in the firing range, that muzzle was on there, it was working properly. But when you loaded into an actual match, that muzzle was nowhere to be found. It wasn't on your gun. You weren't getting the effects of it. And that one took a long time for them to get on top of and fix. Additionally, at one point, they broke a lot of the animations, so there were weird overlapping animations and stuff that were happening. Some audio bugs took place as well throughout the game's life cycle. Just lots of little things sprinkled in there throughout the year. To my knowledge, every single one of them ended up getting resolved at some point, but some of them did go on for a while. Then let's talk about some clear balancing issues that were just never resolved. Now, overall, they did do a ton of weapon balancing, a ton of perk balancing, vest balancing, but I still feel there were many things that were just left ignored, essentially. So, like, there's still a good handful of useless Modern Warfare 2 guns. Like, there's just no reason to use those particular Modern Warfare 2 guns because they are significantly outclassed by all of the other guns in that weapon class. There's also various perks that I just feel never saw any love, and they were totally useless. Like the threat identification system, for instance, which is the super watered down version of High Alert that relies on the enemy using a certain type of attachment, like a laser or a thermal sight, for instance. That perk was incredibly weak compared to everything it was paired against. Also, things like the LR detector, the signal jammer. There's just a good handful of items in this game where I could pull them out and be like, why would anybody ever use this over the alternatives? And I can't really think of any good reasons for it. After that, let's talk about footsteps a little bit, and more specifically, covert sneakers and the ninja vest. In this game, covert sneakers and ninja were absolutely crutches, which I also mentioned in the What They Did Right video, because I appreciate the fact that those crutches at least existed in the game, because I think the gameplay would be much worse off without them. But at the same time, I just felt like they never really nailed the balance with default footstep audio. To me, the solution to covert sneakers being a crutch is quite clear, and that is not to nerf covert sneakers or anything. That is to look at why everybody is using covert sneakers and target the root cause of that issue. And the root cause is default footstep audio is too loud, so if you're not using covert sneakers, you feel as though you're at too much of a disadvantage if you're moving around the map. Now, I know they did do some footstep tuning throughout the game's lifecycle, but in my eyes, they just didn't quite find that perfect balance with base footstep audio to the point where people would feel confident branching outside of covert sneakers, even in respawn game modes. And so that is an area that I feel belongs in this video. I think it's something that they just didn't quite get nailed down, and it would have made a big difference to open up that boot category more and allow for a lot more variety in there, especially in the higher skilled lobbies where everybody's got a headset and they're listening very carefully for any footstep audio. And that's where we're gonna leave it for this random miscellaneous section where I'm just kind of throwing in a bunch of random points. Next, let's talk about map rotation a little bit. This is another issue I had throughout a lot of the life cycle of this game. In the game's current state, it's in a much better place now, but we had to deal with this for quite some time. Something I noticed with this game after a couple seasons is many of the maps that were in the game were simply missing from rotation, at least for various game modes, and therefore it was kind of frustrating knowing that there were a ton of maps in this game, but you only ever had access to a handful of those maps within your preferred game mode. Like for me, Domination's my preferred game mode, and you would think a pretty standard mode like Domination would include every 6v6 map in the game, and that just wasn't the case for a huge part of this game's life cycle. And even to this day, there are a few maps in the game that I haven't seen in literally months. I haven't seen them pop up, not even once. And that's obviously frustrating because you're not taking advantage of the full amount of map content that's available in the game. And another issue that kind of ties in with this is map variance. I've gotta say, after dealing with map variants for a year with Modern Warfare 3, I'm just not a fan, and outside of specific seasonal maps, I just hope map variants don't return. Like, I'm totally fine if they have a Christmas variant map, or like a Halloween, or a St. Patrick's Day variant map. That's cool, I'm totally on board with those. But in Modern Warfare 3, we just saw tons of crazy map variants, and for a big portion of the life cycle, this just diluted the map pool a lot. Again, this is something they did resolve, and now those variant maps are relegated to their own playlist in Quick Play. But it's just one of those things where, at least for me, it just felt super unnecessary to have these variant maps, and I was totally fine never playing on them. In fact, I preferred not playing on the variant maps, for the most part. The one exception is Skid Row, because it has better lighting than Skid Row. So that's map rotation. Next up, I want to talk about a huge missed opportunity. And I know it's a little strange to criticize them for something they didn't do rather than things that they did do with the game, but this is one of those things where I fully expected this to come at some point throughout this game's lifecycle, and it would have made a huge difference in my enjoyment of the game, and this is Specialist. And I'm not talking about like specialist abilities, I'm talking about the Specialist Strike package that was introduced in the original Modern Warfare 3, which is one of the reasons we kind of expected it for this version of Modern Warfare 3. And this is where you have the ability to sacrifice earning your kill streak rewards, and instead, as you go on a streak in the same life, you earn more perks until you get your Specialist bonus, which gives you all of the perks in the game. And then, of course, if you die, it resets that, and you have to do it all over again. This is one of those areas where, for Modern Warfare 2, I could see why it wasn't really viable to make this work because of their horrible perk charging system that they had in that game. But in Modern Warfare 3, it could have worked. They could have made it work. And I know you can make the argument like, well, you can't wear multiple pairs of boots. First off, challenge accepted, yes I can. And second, I don't really care what the perk tiers are called. I don't care if they're called gloves or boots or gear. That naming system alone shouldn't have held them back from bringing an amazing feature to Modern Warfare 3. And also a feature that many of us were just begging for throughout the entire life cycle of this game. In my eyes, this really would have pushed the game forward by a noticeable margin, and also the replayability of the game would have shot through the roof. At least for me, that's my opinion. I really do like Specialist, and I'm so sad that we never got to experience that in this game. And this brings us to the final section of the video, and you're gonna see this section on every one of these final review videos of what they did wrong in the past, 5 5 years now. This is, of course, their modern matchmaking system and disbanding lobbies. I'm not going to dive too deep into this since I've done that way too much in the past already. And I will also say, in the game's current state, the matchmaking doesn't actually feel that bad. And I think that's because the player count has dropped off quite a bit. And the lower the player count, the less the matchmaking system is able to do as far as finding similarly skilled players, if you're an outlier player, that is. So at the moment, based on my recent experience with the game, the matchmaking isn't all that bad. But for much of the life cycle, I just felt it was way too strict. And while it was nice to get the white papers on that, where they went into a lot more detail with how they handled this, that was more of a Call of Duty thing than a Modern Warfare 3 thing. At the end of the day, I still don't like how they handle matchmaking in this game. I'm fine with SBMM existing. I'm not really happy with the state of SBMM in modern Call of Duties, though. Especially since you can never see where you stand or track your improvement over time within that system. Now, on top of that, and more importantly, disbanding lobbies. This is something we've been dealing with since the launch of Modern Warfare 2019. And in my eyes, this is the #1 worst thing that they have done with the Call of Duty franchise as far as like conscious design decisions. And I've gone over the reasons many times in the past, but some of the big ones, just the general sense of community isn't there anymore. You get into a lobby, you play against those people, and after that game, you have no option to stay in that lobby, you have no option for that rematch. There's no time to form any sort of friendships or rivalries, whether that's using game chat or not. Even for people that don't use game chat, with persistent lobbies, there was always that sense of rivalry just with the gameplay itself. You would find that particular player that obviously became your rival, and there'd be a lot of back and forth over multiple games where you're trying to adapt to their play style while they're adapting to your play style. And then sometimes the teams get shuffled and you get to play with that player, and oftentimes the chemistry was there with that player. Again, not even using game chat, just through the gameplay alone, you'd form that sort of chemistry with other players because your play styles just mesh really well together, and in many cases, that's how friendships are formed. And I'm talking real friendships, not just in-game friendships. All of that is essentially gone with disbanding lobbies. And then on top of that, connection consistency. That's one of my big complaints with this game, and much of that would have gone away if we just had persistent lobbies, where once you get into a lobby, you're playing on that server with that consistent connection experience until you decide to leave that lobby. As it is right now, it rolls the dice for you. It takes that choice away from the player. There's no option for a rematch. There's no option to stay and play with people that you had fun playing with and against. Apparently the game knows what's best for you, so it pulls you out and it searches automatically every time. And I also feel that's one of the biggest reasons that modern SBMM is hated as much as it is in Call of Duty. If we had persistent lobbies, I don't think it would be as frustrating because there'd be a lot more consistency on a match-to-match basis. And there we go. That's all the detail I'm going to get into with that. Obviously, I have made entire videos talking about that in the past, diving into even more detail than that. But with that, that is going to wrap it up for today's video on what I didn't like with Modern Warfare 3 this time around. Now, overall, like I said, this is my favorite Call of Duty game in the modern era. Overall, I think they did a very good job with what they were given with Modern Warfare 3. But obviously, that doesn't mean it wasn't without issues, and it was absolutely not a perfect game either. And of course, all of these are just my opinions, and I'm really curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. What did you not like about Modern Warfare 3 throughout the past year? And then what are your final thoughts on this game as well? Was it a generally good game for you, a bad game for you? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.